Hello, my name is Miss Amber, and I'm here with your English 11A live lesson. Now, for this class so far, we've made it all the way up until the second lesson of the second unit, and this is going to be Elements of Romantic Literature. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Okay, so this focuses mostly on American Romantic writers. The Romantic movement was something that happened in the European continent first and then made its way to the US. But we're focused on mostly American Romantic writers. Now, they start the lesson with literary devices. They want you to know what allusion is, and they want you to know what irony is. So this lesson focuses on works for your reading that have to do with these two things. Now, here in the first paragraph, they basically tell you that it's important to keep in mind that American Romantic writers put lots of layers of meaning into their stories. And allusion is one of the ways that they do that. So I give you the definition here. An allusion is an indirect or passing reference to a historical person or event, literary work, character, or passage. And then they give you an example here. Moby Dick is a famous book about a man who was obsessed with hunting a very specific whale, a white whale. The first line of that book is "Call me Ishmael." And Ishmael is actually the name of someone, a character in the Bible, actually. There's a biblical figure named Ishmael, and he basically, the long and short story of his appearance in the Bible is that he is cast out by his dad to live out in the wilderness, but God protects him. And he ends up living to become an important figure in his tribe or group. So they're referencing the Ishmael from that biblical story by naming their character Ishmael. The same way that people will like name their kids, or if you're doing short stories on your own, you might name your character or, replace someone's name with another name that you like to keep things anonymous. If you're telling someone a story, people do that in novels too. So if you're referencing something that's well known or that most people know, it's called an allusion. Now, back at this time, religion was very important. Most people had come up studying the Bible because of how important religious beliefs were to people at that time. So Ishmael is a reference that almost everyone would have gotten. And if you know the story of Ishmael, you would be able to predict that the story Moby Dick will involve some of the same hardships and difficulties that the biblical Ishmael faced. Now, allusions are good for this sort of thing because you get to carry meaning from a reference that people already get into what you're doing now. Like, to make a comparison to something recent, I would compare it to jokes that people tell about memes, right? So when you're referencing a meme, you have to understand the meme to understand the joke. But the meme itself has its own like definition and meaning and stuff that it's referring to. So you have like two layers of meaning that are happening there. You have the joke, and then the underlying joke of referencing the meme, and then the actual meaning of the meme. All of that squished together. Allusions are basically that same thing, but for just historical stuff. So they add layers by adding or by naming the character Ishmael. Melville gets the reference to Ishmael from the Bible, and not just the reference to him to the guy from the Bible, but also any of the meanings and connections that you get from understanding what Ishmael's story was about in the Bible. On top of that, if you are referencing the Bible in just the name of the character already from the very beginning, you're preparing your readers to be on the lookout for other biblical meanings and crossovers in your book. So you're priming their brains to look for those sort of references before they even start the book, which means that they'll make connections between other things that are in the book and the Bible or religious symbolism and stuff. So they add depth by introducing layers of meaning by associating a specific idea, character, or event that exists outside the text with a specific reference within the text. Exactly. Making a joke out of a meme. The writer is able to achieve a level of subtlety with an allusion that might not be present in an overt statement. Similarly, with memes, using memes as an example, if someone doesn't understand the meme that your joke is based off of, they're not going to get it. They're not going to understand the context. And sometimes when you reference a meme that's from a very specific circumstance or a very specific situation, like memes that pop up from television shows, from YouTube videos, from special communities, not only is it important for you to understand the meaning of the meme, but sometimes the situation that the meme was created in also carries meaning over. So allusions just do this in real life with other references. When you reference painters, singers, authors, famous books, it's literally the same thing. If everyone who's read a book makes the same joke and you make a reference to that joke in your book, only people who have read the book that the joke came from is going to get the reference and get the connections that your story may have to the themes that were in that other book. Now here they give you a little more information about what kinds of things can be allusions, but it can pretty much be anything. With that being said, there are things that are like most commonly references in books. In books, usually the most common allusions are Shakespearean to plays like Romeo and Juliet, biblical to the Bible, because most people have at least heard of the Bible, even if they aren't Christian, and mythological. And I mean, mythological isn't something that you would think about at first, but take a moment. We just had an entire, recently, in like the last few years, we've got a whole expanded Marvel universe. Guess who's in that series? We have a whole Loki. Loki is a character from Norse mythology, and most people knew about Loki even before all of this hype. He's been featured in television shows, in video games. The new God of War series features Loki. There have been books made about him, that kind of thing. Zeus, thinking about Zeus in the Greek pantheon, we see those things everywhere. Hercules, that kind of stuff. Even people who never did extensive research on these characters when they were kids, they at least know in passing who these people are. If someone makes a reference to Hercules as a joke, we know that they are talking about someone being strong and capable because that's what he's known for. Even if you haven't done any research, you haven't written a single paper, you haven't read an entire book about Hercules, you know what he's associated with, because at that point he's become a symbol that can be used in an elusive reference. Another example that's not listed here would be Sherlock Holmes. Very often there's like, you know, the saying, basically just about, oh, so you're a regular everyday Sherlock. If you solve mysteries, if you're very keen on details, if you pick up things very easily, you solve puzzles, put things together. And just things like that, references that society in general tends to actually get exposed to a lot. So back in the times where this was being written, during the Romantic period in movement, the things that were most common were the Shakespearean, biblical, and mythological stuff. But as time grows and people get exposed to more things, obviously different types of references become more common. Nowadays, we see references to video game characters, movies and things, even in rap songs and stuff like that, you get references to these things. And the artists that are creating this content expect you to know what they're talking about when they make these references. So they give you some steps here, how to try to find allusions. If you're reading for allusions, start by marking any unfamiliar proper nouns. So proper nouns are names, basically. So if they are capitalized names, you could tell that's the name of something, but you don't know quite what it is, they say to write it down and make notes. Then they want you to highlight any passages that seem familiar because lines might be a reference to something that you've read before, even if it's something that you've read previously for this class in the 10th grade or ninth grade classes. And then finally, mark all passages that appear to be incomplete in meaning or purpose. So you can kind of tell when a sentence is a full sentence. Even if there's a word missing, you still have to get it via context clues. For the most part, people can tell when a sentence is actually complete. But if you read a sentence and there seems to be some meaning missing, if there's a reference being made to something and you don't understand how it's supposed to add to the sentence, then you might want to mark that down because it's possibly an illusion. And after that, you want to do research, do a quick Google search, especially on the proper name. What is this? Where did it come from? Where was the first reference to it? And that'll give you a pretty good idea on if it's an illusion or not. Now, they recommend an encyclopedia for doing this sort of thing, just because encyclopedias have lots of information about lots of different things. Dictionaries are themed on words. The sources are themed on common words. And words that can be exchanged with one another. But trying to find a bunch of different types of references in one place, an encyclopedia is the best place to do that. Okay. Now, this video here on slide 8 goes into information about irony, the different types of irony, and how irony can be used for humor. Now, there's 2 videos in this lesson, which is a little odd. But the first one, this one deals with irony. There are 3 types. I'll do just like a quick overview. There is dramatic irony, which happens on a stage. It's when the audience can see everything that's happening in a play, but the characters in the play don't know what's about to happen. There's situational irony, which is when you are reading a story and you, as the reader and the characters in the book, don't know what's going to happen. So you're both surprised when you get to the end. And then there's verbal irony, which is when you say the opposite of what you mean. So for example, if it's raining outside and someone says, "Oh, wow, this is great weather," they are using irony to exaggerate the fact that it's actually the opposite of that. Now, here on slide 10 is the second video. Now, this video is about satire. Now, satire and irony get mixed up all the time, and you should watch this video to get a better idea of what satire actually is. But just as a shortcut, in case you know, in case you've gone to the English Concept, the English Concept doc and taken a look at the differences between the two. Satire is when you specifically use irony to criticize or make fun of someone. That's the difference between satire and irony. And he goes into a little more detail about that. If you're using irony to insult someone, to criticize them, or make fun of them, then it's satire. If you are just making a neutral statement, then it's irony. Okay, in this section, we're getting into allegories. So all of these things, keep in mind, all of these things that we've gone over, allusions, irony, satire, these are all things that were present in romantic literature, especially American romantic literature. So that's why this lesson is so focused on giving you the information first before we get to the readings. Now, an allegory, they give you the information here. An allegory is a fictional narrative. Remember that narrative means story, in which the literal story itself reflects another parallel meaning. Allegories are seemingly simple stories that contain at least 2 levels of meaning. So there's usually a surface story where events happen, there's a problem, it gets solved. But an allegory is when there's a deeper meaning to the story other than just what has happened. So sometimes fables can be allegories, like those type of children's stories that feature animals that outsmart each other. For example, the turtle and the hare. On the surface, that story is just about a turtle that races a hare, which is a type of rabbit, and the turtle ends up winning because he takes things slowly. He doesn't take a nap, he takes his time, he makes steady progress, and he gets to the goal. The rabbit or the hare does not win because he goes too fast. He expends all his energy, uses all of his energy up, and has to stop to take a nap. And during that nap, the turtle takes the lead and gets to the finish line. Now, on the surface, that's it. That's the story. But you can go one level deeper and say that the turtle represents or is a symbol for people who might work slowly but are always making progress. Maybe people who can't make big leaps to get their tasks done all the time at a neck-breaking speed. And the hare will represent people who do enough to get far ahead to show off, but don't have the resolve to actually push things through to finish, and comparing those two types of people to each other, and how it's important to keep in mind what that result looks like in real life. Starting off strong doesn't mean anything if you don't finish just as strongly. Now, the fact that the story has both of these meanings is what makes it an allegory. You just have the surface story about a race between two animals, and then on the lower ring, we have personalities, we have habits that are being spoken about. So when you have stories like that, where the surface story has meaning underneath in a layer, that's an allegory. And in the example I gave you with the turtle and the hare, they are both symbols in this case. Things in allegories are usually symbols. And that's why they say here you have to know what metaphors are and what symbols are to get this concept. So just as a quick refresher, metaphor is when you compare one thing to another without, that means not using the words like or as. And a symbol is when some object, person, or event in a story represents something else. Sometimes it can be very direct, like you'll name a character Love or something like that. And that character is supposed to represent that concept in real life and what happens to it. And sometimes it's less subtle. You can't actually tell if something is a symbol until you finish the whole story. Now down here in the last of this paragraph, it says authors might use symbolism in an allegory to impart basic truths or religious, moral, or political lessons to readers. So they're trying to teach you a lesson or a moral based on the story. Often, symbolism in literary works is found in the names of the characters and settings. That would be the more obvious type of symbolism that an author uses. Characters are used to signify abstract qualities or ideas, such as love, death, hope, and charity. So usually when it's this simple, the characters are just named after whatever it is they are supposed to be. And then it says settings, on the other hand, usually represent the relationships among the characters or concepts. This is kind of where you get some of the stereotypical stuff that you see in movies. Usually if a setting or background is really dreary, if the color is faded, if it's stormy outside, it's gonna be draining, exhausting, or just bad things are gonna happen. When you see sad things happen and then it starts raining outside, the setting is a symbol that represents what the character's going through and different people's relationships with whatever it is that's happening. When you see lots of red, lots of destruction, those sort of settings can represent someone's anger, that kind of thing. Now here they give you the purpose of an allegory in case you weren't sure about it. Basically, it's just to use the surface level story to give you a deeper meaning. They kind of wrap it up in a nice bow so that you don't have to dig too deep to find it in most cases. And the idea of an allegory is just to, if you can't write a full novel about something, if you want to be straight to the point, if you want to just get there and get the story out to people without making it too convoluted, then usually allegory is the way to go. You get to put in abstract ideas instead of writing about a real person. And you can use those symbols that you put in the story to show like a larger concept than what's in the story on its own. They give you the definition of symbol here for your notes directly. A symbol is a representation of an individual idea or concept, and it can shift in meaning across the literary work. So basically, as things happen to the symbol or the environment around the symbol changes, the symbol can also change its meaning as well. So as a small example, in Beauty and the Beast, the Disney film, the Beast has a rose that represents, that's supposed to be like a marker of his curse. If he doesn't find someone to fall in love with him by the time the last petal falls off of the flower, then he's like doomed to be a beast forever. That's pretty much the gist of it. But the flower, as it's wilting, it also represents his faith in humanity. He's locked up in his castle. He doesn't really know anyone. He doesn't talk to anyone outside of his servants. He absolutely does not believe in people. And you also have to remember that he was kind of a jerk before he got turned into a beast. That's why he got turned into one in the first place. So now that he's, in that state, he can't go anywhere or do anything. He's pretty much just waiting for someone to come rescue him. His hope for that to happen dwindles with each petal falling. So the petals on the rose end up representing two things at once. Let's see. For example, they give you an example from the minister's black veil for a symbol. So there's a minister in this story, and he starts wearing a black veil over his face. He refuses to lift it. The townspeople are interested in it at first, and after that, they kind of get scared about what might be underneath it, even though he's a person. But even when he's on his deathbed, he's sick and he's dying, he refuses to remove the veil. And he tells the townspeople basically to be afraid, not just of him, but everyone else. He says, tremble also at each other. Look around, I look around me, and lo, on every visage is a black veil. So he's using the veil to symbolize evil and shame, not just the choice that this person made to wear a veil. So he's using the veil as a symbol that shifts over time. At first, you don't think the veil has anything to do with anyone but just this minister. But when he's on his deathbed and he says, you all look the same as me, we're all wearing a black veil, then that tells you, includes you in on the fact that it has a deeper purpose. It means something. Okay, so then we get into the lightning rod man. This first section just gives you a lot of information about Herman Melville. In the beginning, it gives you his life story. He basically traveled around a whole lot. He was a sailor on a couple whaling ships. He was part of a mutiny at some point. He joined the Navy at some point. He had to wander around in the wilderness and survive with like a tribe of people at some point. So he's actually done a lot. And most of the experiences that he had while he was traveling, he wrote travel books about them. So he would describe what things were like, what the weather was like, which things were exciting, which things were not exciting, all of these kinds of things. So I recommend that you read this and take notes on which adventures he went on inspired him to write stories, because they're interspersed in here. There's a few of them. There's Typee, there's Amu, there's White Jacket. These are all, and Moby Dick at the bottom. These are all books of his that were inspired by actual adventures that he went on to be able to describe the stuff that he has in his books. So they ask you to keep these questions in mind while you're reading The Lightning Rod Man. What types of illusions are used in the story? What underlying meaning do the illusions reveal if you know about them or have to look them up? Why does the lightning rod man insist that his is the only true rod? And what instances of irony do you notice? How are they used? Now, of course, I don't go over excerpts because it would take too long for these live lessons. However, I will go over some of the finer points that they make about this short story in the next couple slides. Now, the analysis pretty much gives you everything that you could possibly need other than just reading the book itself. It is important for you to go back and read the story. I'm going to remind you just in case, because the mastery test questions are very likely to give you quotes from the actual lesson and ask you to interpret them. So even though I'm going over these analyses, I think it's important for you to have a little bit of a push to help you understand things while you're reading them. But you should actually be reading the reading selections. So I'm not going to go through the entire summary of the story because you can get that through reading the actual excerpt. But there are different types of elusive references in here. There's mythological, biblical, literary, historical, and scientific. So all of these references. Generally, the story is a confrontation, a conversation between a door-to-door salesman who's trying to sell a lightning rod and the narrator, the person who's telling the story. And the point of the book is basically to compare the door-to-door salesman to missionaries that try to convert people. There was a Christian revival during the time that Melville was alive. So this is him taking his feelings about those people and putting them into a story. So let me talk about the types of illusions that you can see here. There's a couple here that might be difficult for you to get. So we'll go over those. There is a mythological reference in here, and the narrator calls the lightning rod man Jupiter Tonans. Now I'm highlighting the Jupiter because this is an important reference to make, and it'll all make sense as soon as I actually make the connection for you. Jupiter is the Roman name for the god of thunder and lightning, Zeus. Jupiter and Zeus are the same character, the same person. The Romans just used a different name for him. So the narrator calling the lightning rod man, or the person who's selling lightning rods, Jupiter, is a reference to the fact that he's selling lightning rods. There's other storm references in this story, but they're a little more obvious than this one. So I just wanted to make sure you could put two and two together. By referring to the lightning rod man as Mr. Jupiter Tonans, a pagan god, the narrator is in essence calling the salesman a pagan as well. So it's a twofold thing. They're referencing both Zeus and the fact that the Christians don't worship Zeus at all. So this helps to inform the reader that there's a religious allegory in the story. So since all of these connections can be made between the divine, which are like gods, Zeus is a god, that there are lots of religious things in here, even outside of the salesman being like representative of Christian missionary. Now, they give you a little information here just about the Romantics. As part of the Romantic movement, people at that time emphasized more of an individual one-on-one relationship with God instead of going through the church. So some of the references to science in the Lightning Rod Man basically are there to remind the reader that you can be into science and still believe in religion. Your personal relationship with God is supposed to be your own. And this is the time period when that philosophy was dominant. People were getting less into being a part of the church and more about their own spirituality internally. Now, there are some other references to scientific theory and stuff in this story. Part of it is that the man is trying to sell lightning rods, which actually has to do with using science, using science to basically divert lightning from dangerous places. But there are other words too. They reference St. Elmo's fire, which is a glow around objects that discharge electricity. That's what that's called. And just descriptions of the lightning. They use some scientific representation in there. Now, they tell you here at the top, the label is on the tin, they just kind of give it away. Understanding the illusions reveals Melville's purpose to equate missionaries not only with pagans, but also the devil. And they give you an excerpt here where the scowl grew blacker on his face, the indigo circles enlarged. So he's like using a description of something similar to a demon to actually describe the salesman in this book. And the reason why he's making this illusion here is because the lightning rod man claims that his is the only true rod, which is supposed to be a play on words to the Christian concept of the one true God. Those lines sound the same. Now, he's doing this because he doesn't believe in what the salesman is saying. He also doesn't believe in what the missionaries are trying to do. He thinks that the type of missionary work that they do is the furthest from actually being godly. So he refers to or alludes to the salesman being the devil for that reason. Basically, Melville thinks that these people are possibly using religion for evil purposes instead of letting people, educating people and letting them find their own way. At the bottom here, we have Melville was known to be a religious man, but again, as a romantic, he believed in the personal, intuitive path to spirituality, not conversion through organized religion. Let's see. Oh, yes, this is also important. The narrator compares the lightning rod man to Johann Tetzel, who was a real person. This is not an illusion that you could understand, so this is why I'm covering this. He was a 16th century German preacher who used to sell indulgences. It says salvation in parentheses, but I want to give you a little more information on that. Pardoners used to sell indulgences, and this was a practice from like the 1200s, 1400s. Basically, indulgences are slips of paper that say you are forgiven by the church for your sins. So the idea was that you would actually have to confess to the pardoner and pay a sum based on what you were being forgiven for. And then they would give you a slip that basically says you were absolved of this. And this was known at this time to be a corrupt thing during Melville's time. You are not God, is the idea. So you can't tell people if they're forgiven or not. So you're basically just collecting their money just based on their insecurities about going to hell when they die. And people view that as very corrupt. Melville obviously views that as corrupt because he makes a reference to this person by comparing the rod salesman to them. So it says here, thereby trading in people's sins and guilt to make a profit. So that's the sort of thing that he's referencing in those lines. Let's see. Oh, yep, this is more about what we were previously talking about. The biblical allusions are Melville's response to the missionaries' perspective that their religion is the only path to salvation, instead of finding spirituality on your own. That's a really big theme in this story. There's a lot of biblical allusions in here, and the point of him having those in there is to try to persuade people that you don't need to be a part of a big church to be saved. You can learn and grow on your own. And then on this last slide, it says here, Melville also uses verbal irony to heighten the impact of the allegory. So verbal irony, remember, is when you say one thing but you mean another. Some verbal irony comes from the narrator's use of sarcasm to deride. Deride means to scold or to criticize the lightning rod man. and then they give you an example. Basically, after it's obvious that the narrator in the story doesn't want to consider buying the rod, he says sarcastically, "A very fine rod, I dare say." That's definitely sarcasm. When you come across it in the reading, it's supposed to be verbal irony. It's sarcasm. Okay, now the second reading is a little easier to grasp, I think. It's by Nathaniel Hawthorne, so they give you a little information about him. But basically, he wrote a whole lot. He's known for writing a lot of things. One of his achievements was writing 20 works, more than 20 works in the span of 3 years. His famous works are The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables. And he did have some romantic themes in his work, which is why he's being included here. It's important to note he is connected to some of the other authors we've talked about in this lesson. He was friends with Herman Melville, that's the author we were just talking about. And when Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, he dedicated that book to Hawthorne. So the story that we're going to be reading from him is Mr. Heidegger's Experiment. Here are some questions I want you to keep in mind. What idea does each character in this story represent allegorically? And what abstract idea does the story represent as a whole? Now, this story is pretty easy to understand. Basically, it's a group of people who are all coming to drink from the fountain of youth. 4 of them drink from the fountain of youth and become young again. But you find out in the story that they have really awful personalities, and their personalities are based on some of the 7 deadly sins. So we've got pompousness, greed, lust, and vanity in this story. This is actually a very easy story to read, so I'm not going to go over this analysis point by point, but you get information about the characters pretty much from how they treat each other. But one of the characters, Dr. Heidegger, he is the only one who doesn't drink from the fountain of youth. So there's some themes in here about wisdom and how that correlates to age, pretty much. All of these characters are old, and when they first come in, they drink from the fountain of youth and become young again, but they still act foolish. So the story has a couple different points. Because they represent deadly sins, the characters, that's where the symbolism and the allegory comes in. The question is, what does Dr. Heidegger represent? It can't just be wisdom because he's old, because all these characters are old. They're just drinking from the fountain of youth to look young again. But they're still pretty foolish if they're still behaving the way that they do. So the point of this story is to get you thinking, what is real wisdom? How do we actually find it? It has to be a quality that you have as a person, and it's not just age, because there are old people who are not wise. And that's about it. Yeah, I actually think that's it. Yep, that's the whole lesson. Okay, so this isn't as long as some of the other ones, but it's a pretty good lesson. Most of these stories are pretty modern, even though there's some references to things that you might not understand, at least in the very first story with the lightning rod man. It's not written in a way that's difficult to read. This is we're getting close to modern English at this point. As always, if you have any questions, quick questions that we can answer, please send those to english@atsedu.net. If you're having trouble with any of these reading selections, which is fine, it's fine, that happens sometimes, book a tutoring session with either me or Kathy Vahovic, who is the other English tutor. You can get the link for booking tutoring with me or anyone else from your mentor. And also, if you are assigned the resource course for your English class, please make sure that you get the link to the English summaries and that you use it as a guide for when you're going through these, because it can help you with your notes, give you examples of things to write down. They're pretty straight to the point without all of the fluffy explanation that you get in the lesson. I would also say if you are a step up student, that you haven't been assigned the resource course, but you can still have access to it, I would talk to your advocate and make sure that they know that you're interested in having those resources. All of those things are open invites, so you should be able to get an invitation and to open up the doc to use it on your own. I think that that's it though. So this is Miss Amber signing off, and good luck with your English class.